The Damwon Gaming vs T1 series was extremely close, and even up to the final moments of the final game, people were on the edge of their seats. But I want to tell you how I think this game was actually won before the game even started, and it's all off the back of some incredible drafting and adaptations from both sides. Let's break it down. First bans, let's start off here. So there's a LeBlanc ban that was basically out of necessity versus Showmaker, who's been able to dominate even against Faker's Lissandra matchup, which is in history one of the hardest matchups for LeBlanc. J4 and Rise have also been proven picks here, and T1 is mainly hedging against the worst R1, R2 picks possible. Another option here could be Graves, which has also been proven to be a really annoying champion in the current Worlds metagame. However, J4 does have a kit that can pin Aphelios down in certain situations, which we don't really want here. One thing to note is that the Lucian priority has fallen here in this game only because Aphelios was on the table here. Red's side generally has mandatory bans in Yuumi, Lee Sin, Twisted Fate, and Aphelios as well, and this is big because depending on what DK let through, he can also even dictate the course of the draft. Eventually, Aphelios is eventually let through, and then it is a snap pick from T1 as the B1 here, as it is a strong available pick. One big thing to note here actually is how this actually sets the tone for the entire draft. Aphelios' champion identity serves as one of the strongest front-to-back team fighters in the game right now, whose range and engage when he needs it and has great answers to engage when he wants it. Aphelios is awesome in what he does, but he can generally be considered a known quantity in terms of his playstyle. This is important because DK uses this knowledge to the absolute maximum in order to craft their comp, which shows how calm they are in spite of this tense Game 5 situation. This doesn't mean that T1 isn't in a good spot here, as the Aphelios has been a nuisance for the entire series. The two main ways teams can really deal with Aphelios are to either get extremely aggressive to delete him, which can be difficult for many teams to execute on, or to actually play outside of his effective range so he can't really do too much. This leads into the R1, R2 picks being Graves and Ziggs. I'm not very surprised by the Graves pick here because it's been a priority pick for what seems to be almost the entirety of the World's metagame and this series. It has barely any losing matchups, it has incredible skirmish power in the early game, and which are two things that are incredibly potent when you're playing at the World stage. The Ziggs is an awesome pick here because it's a champion that will literally just never really interact with Aphelios in the game, and it can entirely play outside of his range. This is one of the strongest matchups DK can draft here because it not only matches the scaling of Aphelios, but contextually it can outscale. T1's B2, B3 pick are the Kennen and Xin Zhao, which are relatively safe all-rounder picks here in different ways. Xin is probably the best jungler in slot here since J4 and Lee Sin are banned, so it's a decent pick all things considered. The Kennen is also technically a blind, but with the nature of the presence of Graves, it's most likely going to be top, and T1 is likely hedging against this with a safe matchup into it. The Rakan R3 is an interesting pick because there have been some really weird support tech picks coming throughout the series. We've seen the likes of Maokai and Zillion come up, champions that we would never have expected to have a debut on the world stage. However, DK's comp is currently looking for a champion that has excellent peel and can conveniently create an intense amount of space. Another great pick here could be the Leona, since she can play in both directions in a sense, but she definitely excels more on the engage side than the disengage. For champions that meet this, you think of champions like Thresh, Braum, and the Rakan. Considering the Ziggs pick already though, I can understand the approach to opt for the Rakan pick here. Out of the three champs mentioned, it's likely best in slot here, and a champ like Leo could put us into the trap of face tanking Aphelios, which isn't exactly what we want. Pushing us to the next set of bans, we are missing mid and support from the side of T1 and jungle and mid from the side of DK. T1's bans are looking to neutralize as many bad matchups mid as they can, while also thinking about anything left in the jungle pool that they can really choke out. The Kiana and Kassadin bans come through, which are chaos-inducing champions that make the game generally difficult with the power of an R5 pick that DK has. The lack of mid bans here from DK means that the R5 pick was likely going to be burned on a Showmaker, getting as strong as an advantage as possible. The resulting bans being the Thresh and the Lulu for Aphelios actually cut off conventional options for the Aphelios combos. Maybe you could argue the Braum was still available, but T1 really doesn't want to be picking it here because DK is already pivoting for a comp that never really wants to be engaging. Braum just adds fuel to the fire for that win condition for DK, so we'll expect some of Keiria's tech picks to come through again. In R4, we should expect to see a jungle counter pick here because it only makes sense to R5 mid at this point, and then DK opt for the Talon. This causes quite the chaos in the normally safe lanes that T1 has and in the backward direction of their team fights, so T1 is now kind of forced to draft a little bit awkwardly. They have to draft a little more engaged to pin down champions like the Ziggs, but they also have to respect the spacing of the Talon. T1's comp identity is too easy to read thanks to this Aphelios pick, and DK planned from the ground up to really counter this comp. This is reflected in the B4, B5, where T1 basically all in into the Azir Zillion, and although this scaling is excellent, the Zoe lock from Showmaker here R5 is the nail in the coffin. The key takeaway from this draft is not only scaling, but scaling relative to what the enemy team has drafted and how your comp works against theirs. Look at T1's comp. You can objectively say that this is a great front-to-back comp built around the Aphelios. You've got a Giga hyperscaling comp, and it's this impenetrable fortress when it's together. It is impossible to engage on this comp, and the space that this comp demands must be respected. Engaging this comp is probably a death wish as well, but DK's comp is literally a comp that can maneuver around this and play around that space no problem. Although T1's composition can't really get engaged on, DK doesn't really need to be engaging. Both teams are technically backwards comps right now, and if T1's comp was the impenetrable castle, DK's comp is the airstrike that comes from outside the castle walls because they can tear through this comp without even needing to worry about engage. They have things like Zoe Bubble and Ziggs to completely poke out the enemy team and force T1 to actually engage on them instead, or else they will just burn up to the picks that DK can create off of their comp. The scaling is great on T1, but against these champions that DK has drafted, T1 actually gets outscaled, believe it or not. DK also has great pressure points on the map, being able to easily play through top and mid through winning matchups, but also even being able to pivot bot if necessary. DK has all the cards they need to stabilize the early game and just choke out T1 at every objective. This is why in the game we actually see the onus and desperation from T1 to actually engage with this comp, which is not really what it was built to do. In my opinion, it was actually the Aphelios that took down T1 here, and it was thanks to those subtle adaptations from DK without a complete understanding of the weaknesses from the comp from T1. This game was really won in the draft, and DK did a great job planning this out. Hope this kind of provided some insight and interpretation on this draft. I'd love to answer any questions you have on it, or any clarifications or opinions you have in the comments. Banger series overall though. I do think both coaches and both teams played really well and just thought about it really well. Hope you guys enjoyed this video though, and I'll see you in the next one. Stay fresh.